the Pediatric Speech Sister Show. I am so thrilled to have my friend Tawny De La Peña on here. The reason why I had her on here is because, frankly, y'all, just a little bit of the backstory. We wanted to really talk about different spiritual paths. And we had a really deep, intimate conversation with a group of friends about different points of view. And we are currently both living in Oklahoma, which, if anyone is familiar with, sorry, my dog is like doing the most. Dude. Okay. If anyone is familiar with Tulsa, Oklahoma, it is in the Bible Belt. So,
it's not just in the Bible Belt states, but we are considered, the Oklahomans find so much pride in being the buckle of the Bible Belt states.
And it's so funny because I didn't really know that because like I'm just from here, but I can also see that because everywhere you turn, equally as amount of dispensaries there are, because now Canada is legal in Oklahoma, there are also churches everywhere. And so right now I am a professor and I'm teaching cultural responsiveness and speech pathology. And I had the students have a presentation about their culture. Well, most people in my class are white Christian women, white Christian Southern women, but there were a few sprinkles of women in there who didn't identify with any religion. And one of my students had a very, just a different perspective that I didn't even think about. I think she identifies as agnostic. And she said that when she was in first grade, one of her teachers talked about Adam and Eve. Now, if you grew up in like a Catholic or Christian background, it's kind of just like a family name almost, talking about Adam and Eve. It's just one of those no-brainers. But if you didn't grow up in a religious background household, you might not know what it is, especially as a first grader. So the teacher berated her for not knowing who Adam and Eve was. And she said to this day, she was actually very traumatized by that situation. So Tawny, I wanted to have you on here, first of all, just to have a fun conversation about the different perspectives. And also, as I told you before, this is primarily an audience of healthcare providers and educators. And so I think that we can do less harm by being mindful of different perspectives.
And I think it's important to note that I do not believe in God, and I have no, I wouldn't call myself atheist or anything, but I just like don't go to church. I like don't, whenever somebody asks me if I believe in God, I always say I believe in me. To kind of, so I can have the conversation without saying like we have completely different beliefs. But I'm not sure if you guys can tell from my attire, but I'm very, very gay. And so like I was raised, I'm also Filipino, if you can't tell from my last name. So as a Filipino, I was raised Catholic. And so there was a point in my life where I was really, really religious. But for me, my story is that the second that I came out of the closet, I was basically like shunned from, like, I was like, even in like the youth group in church, and I was like super religious at this time. I was like 15 years old. And then these were my absolute closest friends growing up. I'm 34 now. Oh my God, I'm actually 35. I'm 35 now. And so 20 years, or is my math right? 20 years later, I still remember and have that bad taste in my mouth toward church, because when I came out of the closet and I found out this really, really big, deep thing about me, of course, the first thing I did was want to tell my friends. And so it just so happened to be the youth group at church. And every single one of them basically didn't want to be my friend anymore. I mean, this was also a different time. It was like 2005. So, So well, that's, I guess, like my background in it.
Well, would you say super religious? Can you like explain what do you mean by super religious?
Okay, so when I think of religion, I think of something that's like very, very rigid, because my background is Catholic. I did not realize how different. I just assumed all religions were the same, just had different names and a few different rules. But until I started pushing myself to become more curious about religion and spirituality, that's when I found out, oh, my image of religion and spirituality is deeply like, it's just so one-sided based on what I grew up in. And so when I say super religious, I think before I used to think it was like, everything you say is praise God and all of that stuff. You go to church every day. You follow the 10 Commandments. You go to confession. You confess your sins. And, you get your little slap on the wrist and have to pray. And like for old Filipino women, I see those women like they make their own altars at home. They pray at those altars. They actually like participate in Advent. I don't know the time, whatever the thing is where you give something up for 40 days. See, it's been so long that
Lit.
I've forgotten.
You're like, I've been out the game for
Yeah.
lit. Yes.
But yeah, that's what I mean by super religious.
And I'll be honest, I honestly am not exactly sure what Advent is either, because right now I'm honoring Lent.
Lent, that's what I meant. Yeah, okay,
Yes,
Lent.
yes,
Yeah,
Lent.
Lent,
Yes,
but Lent. Okay, yeah, yeah,
honoring
yeah.
Lent, but because my beliefs is I am Christian. I wouldn't say I'm religious. I had a friend who was raised Jehovah's Witness, or his mom is Jehovah's Witness, but he's also gay, not really honestly not spiritual, not religious, anything like that. And he saw Bible verses like and post-it notes. To me, that's just another form of like manifesting or affirmations,
Yeah.
just like affirming things. But for him, he's like, no, Melanie is super religious, super religious. And I'm hesitant, and that's even my thing, right? Like that's also a little bit of my own wounding, is I'm hesitant to call myself religious because Christians, as my students just kept affirming, do have a bad stereotype of being
They do.
like,
I
what
don't
would you
feel safe.
say?
I don't generally feel safe around Christians. I will say, since moving to Tulsa and also post-pandemic, like all of this coming together, like post-pandemic specifically, moving to Tulsa and all of that stuff, it made me feel like safer because now I'm exposed to real Christians on a regular basis.
Mm.
But same thing, I'm like, especially during the pandemic, I was like, do not trust any Christians or Republicans,
Yeah. So I will say that my mind has also opened because my students are white, Christian woman, and Republican. And I know all four that I'm like, because you came from Los Angeles, I came from DC and Houston. So just my worldview was just completely liberal, like
Yes.
so
Yeah,
liberal.
same. I came from okay, so I'm from LA, but I moved here from the Bay. And imagine being in the Bay during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Everybody was so polarized and pit up against each other. So when I got here, I was the definition of libtard. Like I needed to just make you believe all my liberal beliefs. And like I was and I like refused to even give a chance to anybody who identified as any of those extremist things, whether you're like conservative or identify as spiritual or religious. I was like, I'm not even gonna give that the time of day. Like I automatically thought you must be stupid. Like, and I can genuinely say until I took it upon myself to push myself past that belief and to maybe see a different perspective, I definitely believed anybody who believed in God was stupid. Like I just genuinely believed that.
Wow. And you know what's amazing though is that you can say this to me and I don't get offended at all, because one thing that came through my mind is the United States, yes, we're a melting pot, but we're also a bubble. So when I traveled to Guatemala and I was able to have like political talks, because it's just like, who really cares? Like to me, who really cares? Now, of course, there are certain things that are just simply harmful, but if someone is telling me that I'm just going to say it, just like, because I'm not a Trump supporter personally. Personally, I do not support Trump. But there are people in our orbit who do support Trump, and there are probably people who choose to be quiet about supporting Donald Trump. And they have their reasons, and their reasons are because they are conservative and they do want to stick by those values. And Tawny, like this whole platform is built on cultural competency and cultural responsiveness. And I think that we kind of are getting off of the religion topic. We'll circle back just like really quick. I think that people forget that culture works both ways. So just like how liberalism is a culture, or being BIPOC, we have our culture. It's a very rich culture. And yes, we're marginalized, which is why we're so rich in it. But at the same time, anyone outside of us, like diversity, it's still diversity. So that's why I really do want, even, I mean, I think that you are a lot more open, just by conversations I've had with you. But I also understand if you've come from a place like the Bay, or people coming from small pockets in Oklahoma, they have to intentionally open their minds. And so that's where I want to kind of circle back to the spirituality debate. What mindset shifts did you make to be more open to people who believed in God?
So first of all, like I have a life coaching business. And so it's called Life with Tawny. So you can hit me
Yes,
at
I'm ready for this one. Yes.
so you can hit me at www.lifewithtawny.com.
Wait, say that
Um,
one.
www.lifewithtawny.com, and you can follow me here at Unlearn the BS,
I love
which
it.
happens to be my tagline. Anyways, so in my coaching business, especially because I launched it here in Oklahoma, what I found was many of my clients do identify as religious or spiritual. And oftentimes, if that's the case, if you identify as one of those two things, you're going to reference them as very similarly to, as you mentioned earlier, almost like affirmations, almost like manifesting. You're going to use scriptures, you're going to use the Bible, you're going to use like religious, spiritual like quotes to help you get through the BS that you're trying to unlearn, you know? And
Mhm.
so I would find my clients bringing this up regularly in sessions, and I knew for a fact that it's not my place. Like my thoughts about this do not belong in these sessions. And I was just like, you know what? If I really do want to create a safe space for these people, I need to understand it and not just quietly hate it.
Well, it's like, I always say this, please hold that thought. I always say this, and this is anyone who has those implicit biases, like about any different culture, but specifically, this is anti-racism. I'm like, you can say that you are anti-racist all day, but at the end of the day, we are all being conditioned, like our subconscious minds are being conditioned by what's in our environment. So if you grew up in an environment that didn't have a lot of, let's just say, for example, like Black people, subconsciously you're going to have limited beliefs about Black people
Yes.
as your subconscious. And if you keep ignoring it, you're basically going to be feeding the dragon. Do you hear my dog barking?
Every time you said black, your dog barked.
Oh, my animals. Yeah. That is so funny. But yeah, you know what I mean? So keep going. Keep going.
It actually started with, because on my life coaching journey, I actually got certified through the life coach school.
Ooh.
Um, and the life coach school is very similar to your audience, where it's predominantly white women who are Christian, who identify as Christian or Mormon or Latter-day Saint. So when I got certified in 2021, all of a sudden, I had all these white women in my network that I became friends with who were wildly different than me. Many of them were Mormon. And so that's when I had no choice. I just like, like we're in class together. And so I ended up like we had to practice coaching with each other. So naturally, I ended up being within their orbit, just like I was in theirs. And the first woman that I actually partnered with, she is very, 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 very religious. And I reached out to her and I said, I'm going to be honest with you. I actually, Kristen, if you're listening, I reached out to you because I thought you were the prettiest girl in class. Um,
Oh,
so I had reached out to her and I said, do you want to practice coaching to her? I mean, do you want to practice coaching together? And she actually was mortified that I had reached out to her, because at this time I had just recently shaved my head and I looked like I have tattoos, all of this stuff. And she was just like, I want nothing to do with this girl. But
oh,
of
wow.
course, she is the one who reaches out to me. Fast forward, she actually ends up having a speech at church one day where she brings me up and talks about how she's like, man, like I really wanted nothing to do with this girl based on what she looked like. And this is why it's so important to remove labels. And so the mindset shift that I took, that I was able to have, was first of all, being in this orbit where I'm not going to base our relationship based on your beliefs. Because right now we have shared beliefs. Everybody here wants to get a certification.
Hmm.
So that's the first page. It's like we just needed to be on the same page about something. It didn't have to be religion. But from that journey, I ended up going to a lot of coaching events that were hosted by the Life Coach School. So I met more and more Christian and Mormon identifying folks, one of which was named Jenny Lakenan, who has a design agency. My career previous to becoming a life coach was as a copywriter. So naturally, she and I got really close. And as I got to know her, she's identifies as Latter-day Saint, but I know that they have a new name. I don't remember what it's called, but I do know it's not LDS anymore. Anyways, I was planning on going to visit her and in Kansas City, since it's only 4 hours away. And I was like, you know what would be a fun way to get to know each other? Like once we met, we hit it off. We couldn't stop talking. And so she was just like, oh, what? And I was like, what if I go to church with you? And it's like, when you're signing up for church, it's like a 3-hour service. So my wife naturally opted out, and then I opted, but I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to go to church. And so that was basically the mindset shift that you're asking about was simply curiosity. And to make it easier on myself, it wasn't curiosity with a stranger. It was curiosity with someone specifically who I respected and cared deeply about. That's how I was able to get over that barrier. When it's a stranger, it's so easy to be mean. But when it's somebody I love and care about and deeply respect, I'm going to have so much more tender love and care than I would if I didn't know anything about you.
Mm-hmm. That makes me think about actually what made me reach out to you, because I saw you at church, which I was hey, Tawny, it's good to see you. And then your reel that you created was hilarious. I'm gonna have to put the link in the show note of your reel, but you're like, and then everyone's like dancing, and I'm it honestly seemed like you were enjoying yourself. So can you tell me, I mean, if you're open to tell us like about your experience at the church here, and again, just how you opened your mind, because I'll say this as a precursor. It's one thing to say, okay, I'll get curious. But then when you're in the actual environment, it could be very nerve wracking. And this goes for any culture where you might be kind of on the fence of accepting or might have those unconscious beliefs and stereotypes about. So would you be open to sharing your experience?
Of course. Well, I mean, like I said, like moving to Tulsa automatically gave me so many more friends who identify as spiritual and religious, or religious, I mean. And there's a reason what I noticed is when I became friends with these people, I can't just call y'all religious people. People would often correct me and say, I don't identify as religious, Tawny. I identify as spiritual, which is why I always use both whenever referencing them. So if I want you to respect me for my lifestyle, I got to respect you. So I got to use your words. You know what I'm saying? Anyways,
Yes.
so on this journey, I met our mutual friend who introduced us to each other is a girl named Vondell Burns.
Yes. Yes.
And Vondell had been wanting me to go to this mega church that she goes to. If y'all haven't heard of it, you might have and not even know. It's based in Tulsa. It's called Transformation Church.
Yes.
And if I was willing to go to Mormon church, why not go to a really fun church that basically is like attending a freaking concert?
It really is.
And like Vondell had wanted me to go. There's a big, like, it was the reason why she actually invited me to the conversation that you and I had had about religion. And it's because she knew I was open to it. And I had already planted my flag in the ground that I am not changing sides. I do not want to believe in God. I do not want to become religious or spiritual. I merely want to understand it more. And so for me, it was like uncovering layers. It's like a gym, right? Like at first, when I open the God door, I can't start with 50-pound weights. I got to start with 5-pound weights. And so for me, I just kept pushing past that discomfort of moving up weight classes. And like the more I learned, the more curiosity I had, the more comfortable I was with going. Now, I'm going to tell you, there was a lot of fear. I'm pretty sure you watched that journey for me on Instagram where I had so much fear leading up to it, to a point where I was so afraid to even walk into the church by myself. Because I know how I look. I'm not blind. I know that I look so gay. And so I just didn't want, and I know other people have eyes too. So I just was so afraid of how I would be treated. if I walked in there. And it was funny because when I went, I didn't have that same fear in the Mormon church because I already know how Mormons are and they're like super Midwestern typey nice. You know, I don't have that same view of Christians. Like,
Okay.
and so when I went here, I was just like, oh God, like what's going to happen? What's going to happen? I'm by myself. And the longer I was by myself, the more my brain was like, this isn't safe. This isn't safe. Get out, get out, get out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because those beliefs, as you know, from like your own coaching and all the stuff that you know about like the way neural paths work, is like, I'm going into survival, fight, or flight in that moment. And in that moment, it's more easy for me for old beliefs like I don't trust these people. Everything they say is stupid. They're just trying to trick you. For all of those old beliefs to surface when you're in a period of stress. And so what I can say is throughout the experience, throughout the mass or service, whatever it's called, is I had those beliefs. I was like, stupid, no, can't believe this. And I was scared, like you see in my video. And yes, I had to really check in with my mind over and over again in order to number one, have a good time, and number two, not to continue judging these people. So I did, in order to do that, I found my intrusive thoughts of like my original beliefs, they kept coming in. And so I was like, all right, how do you be a good student, Tawny? You know how to do that. You're Asian. Just kidding. So I took out my notes and I literally started taking notes on everything I heard to see like, okay, what if I treated this like I would treat any class? Let me see what this means and see how I can apply it to myself
Mm-hmm.
without first dismissing it. Let me just be open to hearing it as opposed to like just shutting it out. And what I realized in that moment, in all of this fear, like that I had leading up to going to Transformation Church, I realized that the entire reason my brain was going like, don't trust them, don't trust them, don't trust them, was because it's something that I don't understand.
Mm.
And that's when I realized, oh,
Beep.
yeah. She asked me not to cuss, and I'm doing a good job.
Right. I love
As you can see, I like cussing.
yes, I love it.
Anyways, okay, so that's when I realized I was like, that's the same reason that I've experienced persecution from religious or spiritual people, and it's because
Mm,
they just don't understand me. And the
right.
more that I've like you know, we are human at the end of the day, and so we denounce just like politics. Same thing goes for religion. When it's something you don't understand, you're gonna have fear about it. You're gonna naturally have like questions and doubts and objections toward it. And that's where it showed me I am be acting exactly like the people I fear so much. I am being, if not, uh, I equal to or more closed-minded than I believe them to be. And
Mm,
so, in order for me to actually process and take in the information that I was receiving at like church, I had to come in. I had to bring my fists down
mm.
so that I could hear it more clearly and not with all the noise that my head had. But that takes a lot of intention. It does take a lot of energy. But I mean, realistically, I'm not unsafe. I was there with three of my friends.
Mhm.
So I made sure to come with a posse. I made sure to not come alone. I made sure that, like, you know what? Like, there's not a tiger here. So
Mm.
chill out, Tawny. It's gonna be okay. Anyways,
Wow.
that was my long story.
That was so powerful. There's some things that are coming up for me because, yeah, I don't like considering myself religion, but I do consider myself spiritual, and the reason why there's a moment where I grew up in a Christian household. There's a moment where I kind of stopped. I didn't necessarily stop believing in Jesus specifically, but I had a lot more questions than I felt answers, and I also knew that my fabric is different, and I'm just really on my whole own life path and finding my own authenticity. And so with that said, I did end up finding Jesus again, but in a completely different way. To where honestly, even with my own church, which I think, you probably might have found that is pretty open. I actually saw a lesbian couple with a child the other day at church, which is amazing. Yeah, I'm like, okay, great. But even with my own church, sometimes I'm like, "Ugh, are y'all gonna think I'm like weird?" So I'm happy that our friend Vondell had that dinner conversation so I could be open with it. And then I found out, oh wait, there are so many people around me who have similar beliefs, like things like angel numbers and so in my life coaching, I'm actually very curious. We'll talk about that after this call. But we learn about the power of the subconscious mind a lot, which is like my jam. We also talk about the spiritual laws. So there's the law of mirrors, which pretty much means you've heard about the spiritual laws?
Mm-mm.
No. So there's the law of mirrors, which is pretty much like you look, we are the same. Ultimately, there's the law of interconnectedness and the law of mirrors. So, for example, let's say that you meet somebody and they just completely trigger you. Well, that's because they probably are your shadow. Like there's
Mm.
probably parts of you that you haven't accepted yet. And that's why this person is coming in front of you and you probably are incredibly triggered by them. Yeah. There's something I was going to say, but I'll just hold that thought. The other one is the law of interconnectedness, which means that we are really all one and the same. We all have a common goal. We're all human beings, right? So that's really what helps me when it comes to my triggers, and that helps my mindset shifts. But I like your perspective on how like you said, it does take a lot of intention, it does take a lot of energy, but it seems like there are specific mindset shifts that you had. Can you explain, like, exactly like the steps of exactly what you did in your brain?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is like, I talked to people, like I said, it started with people I trusted. It
Mm,
had to start with people I trusted and I cared about and respected. All three of those to me were pertinent. It was vital for me to be able to shift over. And I think one of the things, like just by being exposed to these people who had different beliefs as me, I got to see, like, and the pandemic like ended. So it was way less polarizing. But
yeah.
now all of a sudden I live in Oklahoma. The buckle of the Bible Belt states, And
Yeah.
so like I was interacting with all these people, and so like one of the things was just like, okay, it's like the first layer, I guess we can call it my 5-pound weights, is like asking the people I love, trust, and admire and respect about why they believe in God. And the more I had these conversations, the heavier weights I was able to proverbially lift.
Yeah.
And then I felt safe enough with those people to be like, all right, maybe I can trust you. Maybe I could go to church with you and see what happens. And
Mm,
like the more I did it, the easier it was. And the easier it was for me to have these conversations. But I think for me, a turning point for me was when I went to LDS church. I saw a little girl, like a little 12-year-old girl, sounded like a little Ingrid Michaelson. She had made a song on her ukulele for Jesus. And what she sang actually made me cry,
mm,
because if you know me, you know for a fact that like there's one thing that's true, and that I love my wife. There's nobody in my life that is more important than my wife, and we are genuinely, annoyingly, nauseously best friends and inseparable.
yellow
And
roses, please.
I mean, you met her, you know?
Yeah, pictures, oh my gosh. And they both have tattoos. It's really it's really
um,
lovely.
but what I saw with that little girl when she played her little ukulele song about Jesus, was she was singing a song. What it sounded like to me was a love song.
Yeah.
And what I thought about in that moment was, damn, she's really describing how I feel about my wife. And
Mm,
so for me, that was a turnaround moment for me. I said, I know how difficult it is to find somebody you truly love. I
mm,
know the feeling that I know for a fact, the feeling that I have with my wife is so unique, one of a kind, and hard to come by.
mm.
Why should I judge somebody else for having that same kind of love, even if it's in something that I don't believe in? People could also believe that me and Raf's love isn't real because we're two women.
Yeah.
But who am I to judge a little a little girl who's found this love? And
Mm,
like I said, the more I had these conversations, for me, what I realized is like the first step is becoming curious with people I care about, right? And then the next thing I was able to do was like, okay, apply it to me of like, okay, I actually think when people say I believe in God, it's the same way that I think of like I believe in me.
Hmm.
So people use what I noticed was like, okay, like we're saying the same thing, but in a different language.
Yeah.
If I find my motivation in thinking of my future self, that they are also these people who identify as spiritual and religious, they leverage God to feel to generate the confidence, that the same confidence I generate through my future self, which is like the F of my FEF framework. And like if the, we're just these are the tools we are using to allow us to have the self-confidence, to allow us to move forward. And who am I to judge anybody for what motivates them? And
Yeah.
so I think that those 2 points where it's just like it's first becoming curious, and then second seeing and realizing that we actually agree. We're saying the same thing just in a different language. It's no different than if you were speaking English and I'm speaking Tagalog.
Hmm. Wow, Tawny. Thank you so, so much for coming on the show. What changes would you like to see just in the society when it comes to different spiritualities, religions, etc.? What would you like to see? And beliefs, what would you like to see?
I would like to see people just be able to have a conversation, because what happens so often is when people become curious, they ask questions. If the people on the receiving end of the questions could just not be so defensive and maybe allow yourself to also be curious on both ends, to answer like, okay, entertain the question. If somebody says, do you believe in God, maybe don't take it as like you're coming for my neck.
Right.
That which is what somebody could, like, I could interpret it when people ask me that. But instead I say I believe in me, and then we can now have a conversation, instead of course I don't believe in God, why would I? There's a
Mhm.
huge difference in like in whether or not you're adding, like you're inviting a conversation. And I know some of you out there are probably like, man, I don't want to have a conversation about it. But think about how much not having conversations or just being closed-minded to it, how much is that really serving you? And also like how different does that make you from the person that you're opposing?
Mm.
Just
Mhm.
have a conversation. That's it. It's like have a conversation without your arms up. Just chill out. Just have a conversation where we're like that's based on like love and respect, as opposed to defense, defense, defense.
Mhm. Mm. Thank you so much, Tawny. Where can we find you if we want to learn more about you or get coached by you?
Okay, you can find me at Unlearn the BS. I would love to say that I post more on there than I do. So you could also find me at Tawny is the coolest, where I post more often than my business page. But you could also find me if you want to get coached by me. Like I said earlier, you can hit me at www.lifewithtawny.com.
That's amazing, Tawny. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you, everybody who is watching the replay. And we will see you next time.